And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, January 5th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, SOSi is making the most of innovation to stay ahead in federal contracting. Plus, from gift lists to government systems, agentic AI is changing how we plan and prepare. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The past year in federal cybersecurity policy was full of uncertainty. A change in administration, expiring authorities, and the emergence of artificial intelligence all brought plenty of questions to the cybersecurity landscape. Going into 2026, cyber policymakers and experts are hoping for more clarity. For more on what to expect in the year ahead, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now. Justin, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
It has been a busy year in cybersecurity. What are the top things to expect from the Trump administration when it comes to cyber in 2026?
Well, the number one thing that folks are watching is the issuance of a new national cybersecurity strategy. It's expected to drop early in the new year. And White House National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross has spent this past fall, going around the speaker circuit in D.C. and elsewhere and kind of previewing this strategy. During an appearance at the Aspen Institute's Cyber Summit in November, Cairncross talked about how the strategy will, guide agencies through shared policy objectives rather than prescriptive mandates. And its top priority will be shaping adversarial behavior. This is something you hear a lot from Trump administration officials. What they mean by that is trying to impose costs on hackers for the things like ransomware to nation-state attacks on critical infrastructure and government agencies. And this is something, of course, that multiple administrations have sought to do in cybersecurity. But in this case, the Trump administration is really leaning into this idea of shaping costs through things like offensive cyber activity and other things. Here's Cairncross speaking a little bit more about that at the Aspen Institute's Cyber Summit.
It's going to be a short statement of intent and policy, and then it will be paired very quickly with action items and deliverables under that. As a top-line matter, it's going to be focused on shaping adversary behavior, introducing costs and consequences into this mix. I think as a country, we have not done a terrific job of sending a signal to our adversaries that this behavior is not consequence-free. And we need to do that because it is scaling and it is becoming more aggressive every passing day.
Justin, how will those conversations around artificial intelligence play into this new cybersecurity policy?
Well, the strategy will certainly hit on AI, and you could expect it to hit on AI from multiple angles. That's because cyber experts, cyber policies have really broken down how AI plays with cybersecurity into three main buckets. There's these big concerns about how hackers are going to be able to use AI to really speed up and pull off potentially more devastating cybersecurity intrusions and campaigns. This concern that's been longstanding has really came to fruition in November when Anthropic, one of the frontier AI model companies, published a report warning that a group connected to the Chinese government used its Claude Code AI tool as part of a sophisticated espionage campaign. Anthropic claims that this may be one of the first large-scale cyber attacks ever committed without significant human involvement. So those concerns about offensive hackers using AI are pretty ripe right now. There are also concerns, of course, about the security risks of AI systems generally, about the myriad risks that using AI poses to enterprises and individuals when it comes to leaking data, when it comes to potentially pulling open more seams in the digital environment than already exist, just because of the automated nature of these tools, the ability for them to access large amounts of data, and the kind of opacity of how they operate. And then the third big bucket is, of course, how can cyber defenders take advantage of AI? And folks see a lot of opportunities there as well. And I'm sure you'll see the strategy lean into that. There's already been a lot of policy and guidance put out around this. You could look to NIST's AI security framework. NIST published an AI profile for its cybersecurity framework, draft of it just this past December, kind of how AI can be applied, or how the cyber framework can be applied to AI in different ways. And then in early December, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency released some new guidance on securely integrating AI into operational technology, OT, the stuff that really operates some of the physical systems that we all rely on. That's another area to watch, and SOSi is obviously putting out some guidance there.
It sounds like the cyber strategy then will pull all of these disparate pieces together into a comprehensive whole.
That's the hope. And I think, folks see opportunities for there to be even more kind of whole of government and more directness, I guess, on how agencies should be basically tackling these risks around AI, and how the government kind of sees the risks of AI for when it comes to cyber more generally. Drew Bagley is CrowdStrike's Vice President and Counsel for Privacy and Cyber Policy, and he spoke about what he sees as opportunities for AI cyber policy going into 2026.
Coming out of SOSi, there's this opportunity for leadership on AI security, where SOSi can provide guidance to those who are implementing AI in federal agencies as far as what the security standards need to be to make sure that that AI is secure and that AI is not introducing a security threat in and of itself. And that's where I think that a lot of that is really building off of some of the same concepts we've seen for years. And we see a call out to different technologies, right? EDR, zero trust, log management, and concepts like threat hunting. You can really boil it down to visibility. You have visibility into your risk, or do you not?
It sounds like there will be a lot to watch there. What's on Congress's agenda when it comes to cyber?
First and foremost, the reauthorization of SOSi 2015, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015. I know a lot of your listeners have been following this, but for folks who haven't been as closely, the law that basically enables different organizations to share cyber threat information without fear of privacy concerns and things like that, it expired on October 1st of this year. It was revived temporarily as part of the continuing resolution that passed in November, but it expires again on January 30th. And so the question is, will lawmakers extend this law before it expires again? And how will they extend it? Will they do a short-term extension? Will they do a 10-year clean extension that essentially just extends the law as is? Or will they pick up a House bill that tries to update the law and does some things around artificial intelligence and terminology that has just changed since a decade ago when this cybersecurity law was first written? The leaders of these efforts to extend this law are very uncertain about how this is going to go, because there's just a lot of complexities with getting this through Congress. House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Andrew Garbarino spoke a little bit about this at an event in December, and he essentially said he doesn't know what's going to happen in January as they try to come up with a solution. In the House, Garbarino is essentially trying to assuage some Freedom Caucus members who have concerns about free speech and privacy in the bill, and trying to get something through there that can be amenable to their concerns. And in the Senate, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee Chairman Rand Paul has been essentially a huge barrier to reauthorizing this bill. He has tied his concerns about free speech to how SOSi, the agency, previously did some activities around mis and disinformation, and he would like to see kind of a blanket ban on that in any sort of bill. That poses huge challenges to getting bipartisan support in the Senate for this bill. Beyond him, there is a lot of bipartisan support, but since he's the chairman of the committee, he can essentially block a lot of efforts to get a clean reauthorization through, essentially. So there's just a lot of uncertainty around SOSi 2015 going into January.
Justin, this is such a complex topic, and the frontier moves so quickly. What else are you watching for in 2026?
Yeah, one that I think has fallen off of some people's radar, but I know folks are watching it. The Cybersecurity Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. That law is set to be implemented starting this year in some form or fashion. This law will require critical infrastructure organizations of all stripes to report cyber incidents to CISA, the agency, within 72 hours. And this is a major sea change in how cybersecurity information sharing works, in how the cyber regulatory landscape works, because you now have this huge blanket requirement where previously a lot of that collaboration had been voluntary, except for some distinct sectors that were required to report cyber incidents. And so CISA is set to finalize those regulations by May of 2026. The agency had put out a preliminary rule under the Biden administration, a draft rule, I should say, under the Biden administration. That was criticized for being a little bit overly broad and capturing too many types of cyber incidents and critical infrastructure organizations. So the Trump administration has said they're going to try to streamline the SOSi rule and find ways to deconflict it with other cyber regulations. But that's one to watch in May of 2026, what CISA puts out when it comes to cyber incident reporting.
Sounds like it will be another busy year in cyberspace.
Yeah, it's never going to be a dull year, not for any time soon.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, from gift lists to government systems, agentic AI is changing how we plan and prepare. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. If you used AI to plan your holiday travel or organize your gift lists, you've seen its convenience. Agentic AI takes that autonomy further, promising to streamline operations and strengthen security. But it also demands new policies and workforce skills. Jason Oxman, President and CEO of the Information Technology Industry Council, explains what government must do now to prepare. Jason, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
The Information Technology Industry Council, or ITI, has a new paper out, Understanding Agentic AI. Help us with the basics there. What is the difference between agentic AI and some of the most common AI tools we're all familiar with, ChatGPT and its partners?
Well, agentic AI is the next generation of AI, if you will. Agentic refers to the use of an agent, and an agent is someone who does something on your behalf. So when we talk about agentic AI, essentially what we're saying is giving the AI some autonomy to help you as the human user of AI to accomplish a task. So for example, you can set your agentic AI to perform a task for you that you otherwise might have to do yourself. Telling the agentic AI, for example, I want to go travel somewhere. The agentic AI can go search out different travel options, book some tickets for you. You can set the level of autonomy that it has. But the general idea of agentic AI is it is out there using the AI tools to perform a task on your behalf.
And your paper argues that AI can boost productivity, streamline processes, and enhance security. So beyond me using it to put my Christmas shopping list together or book my airline tickets, tell us more about how it can be used in a more particular business sense, I guess.
I think that's a great way to think about it. The business sense uses of AI are ones that we think of as enhancing productivity for the human beings that are involved in a particular task. The best example I like, and this applies to both the private sector and certainly to government, is in customer service use cases. If you're, for example, filing a claim with the VA because of an insurance event or because of the passing of a veteran, you're going to need to call somebody to get some help. And a lot of that help that you're going to need is in very basic tasks. The VA has a lot of information about service records, but it doesn't necessarily have all the information you need to process the claim. Agentic AI can help by telling the agent here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm trying to accomplish on behalf of someone. Can you go out and find this information for me? I need to compile together service records, insurance claims. I need to find a death certificate. I need to find the copy of the policy. Can you go out and find all those things for me? A human being would have a lot of work to do that. AI can help. And then the human being can focus on the more complex and more important tasks, not those kind of rudimentary tasks that AI can help with. So that's a good example of a business use case for AI.
So that sounds like it's a bit more extensive and involved than a chatbot that we might all sort of be familiar with. And you gave there a VA claim example. Talk us through some more cases where government, maybe the federal government or state governments, should be thinking about agentic AI and what it's going to take to put it out there.
Yeah, and you're right to highlight that this is a little different than the usual use cases that we think of with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or any of the other GPT-oriented AIs that we use for various tasks. What the government can do with AI is very different, and I think very exciting. And I think about this in the public sector arena in particular. Think about how public sector procurement works. The United States government is the single largest purchaser of information technology in the world. And those technology purchases need to happen across agencies in many cases for different use cases. And those agencies need to talk to one another and coordinate what they're doing so that agencies can buy technology that interacts effectively across agencies. AI can help with that, agentic AI in particular, by looking at procurement cases across different agencies in a way that a human being wouldn't have access to, because human beings work for one agency at a time and can help with those procurement coordination efforts. We also see the government using AI across use cases where consumers need to access information. Tax information is a great example. You usually have to call a human being and sometimes wait a very long time to get access to that human being to get information on prior tax filings or your current tax filings or to ask questions. Agentic AI can help with that because you can assign it a task and let it know what you're trying to do. It can also help with very simple things like setting up appointments. If you need to talk to somebody in government, set up an appointment to do it, whether it's a healthcare appointment at the VA hospital or whether it's an appointment with somebody at the IRS to talk about your tax situation. A human being shouldn't have to spend time with that. They should spend time on actually helping with what the customer needs. The agentic AI can do the things that are pretty basic, like setting up those appointments. So these are all the kind of use cases that we see. They're really about improving efficiency of employees.
I'm speaking with Jason Oxman. He's president and CEO of ITI. Jason, you gave a couple of different examples there, some that are customer-facing or citizen-facing, some that are back office, internal work. But when the government takes on agentic AI, does it face any particular risks or challenges compared to, say, private sector?
I think the government's primary challenge is with the customer data that governments have. Governments have a lot of information about us, and a lot of that information is sensitive information. And we want to make sure that information is protected. So I think that's a challenge, certainly in the private sector, but it's highlighted particularly in government because government just has a lot more information about us. And that's not to say that that information isn't useful and shouldn't be deployed on our behalf, but we want to make sure when agentic AI is accessing information that's protecting the personal information that we all have. You're a former government employee. I'm a former government employee. They have a lot of information about us. We want to make sure it's protected. That's one thing. A second thing is cybersecurity. There are a lot of bad actors out there that really want to access information. And in some cases, AI can help the criminals in that use case. We've seen recently, for example, a lot of fraud that retailers are facing, AI being used to trick customer service representatives into providing refunds to AI, not to actual human beings. So cybersecurity is a second big area. And the third area is the usual challenge of government, which is making sure that government agencies talk to each other. IT modernization is a big theme that we talk about at ITI, and it's because government systems are old, they're antiquated, they don't do a good job of interacting with one another. So we really want to make sure that government updates systems to get the best value out of IT investment.
One of the other things that your paper brings out is the need to train the workforce for this revolution in operations. What are some of the most critical recommendations that you have for government workforce training?
I'm really glad you raised that because there is this tendency to think of AI and agentic AI in particular as posing a threat to people's jobs. I think it actually enhances and increases opportunity from people's jobs. But as you noted, the only way that works is if people are trained in AI. So the way I like to frame it is AI is not going to take anybody's job. It's only going to take a job of somebody that doesn't know how to use AI from somebody else that does know how to use AI. And that's what we need to make sure we focus on, training the workforce on how to use it. So in the same way that government workers have over the last decades and even centuries had to adjust to new technologies, learning how to use the internet, you learning how to use email, you go farther back, learning how to use typewriters and phones. And all of those technologies have improved the efficiency and the effectiveness of the government workforce. But we need to do training. So we need to make sure that the tools are available to government workers so that they know how to use them, they can make use of them, and they can improve the way in which they provide value to their employers, the American people, by using those tools.
AI policy has been a bit of a flashpoint lately as the federal government and state governments debate who should be in charge of it and how centralized we should make it. Your paper recommends developing a national AI strategy and updating government IT infrastructure to prepare for agentic AI. What would you put at the top of the list for policymakers and legislators as they move into this agentic AI timeframe?
Top of the list is absolutely a national strategy. And the reason I say that is technologies do not recognize state borders. We want to make sure that there aren't 50 different regimes governing the adoption of AI. And the threat of that is that technology will not work as effectively in some states as it will in others if different regulatory regimes are adopted. So the reason we really emphasize the importance of a national AI strategy is because we want one strategy. Everyone knows what the rules are. Everyone knows what protections are in place. And that is of primary importance to ensure the success of AI. And then within that national strategy, protection of data, a national privacy law, which is something we also don't have in the United States, is really important to ensure that everyone is protected in the way that they want their data to be safeguarded. We need cybersecurity measures to make sure that AI is protected from foreign intrusion and from criminal intrusion. All of this really needs to happen at the federal level. And as you noted, it hasn't happened at the federal level yet. So we're really urging Congress to make this a priority, the Trump administration to make this a priority so we get that national roadmap in place. And then federal agencies and operations can adopt AI, knowing what the rules of the road are, and deploy them on behalf of citizens, knowing that they're protected.
The president has issued an AI policy or strategy. What needs to be added to that to complete the picture that you're describing?
Yeah, the president has adopted that national AI strategy, and we're strongly supportive of it. It's a great looking document. It's a great strategy. It has a lot of things to do and accomplish, and a lot of different federal agencies are looking at different pieces of implementation. You know, the things that we think are really important to focus on certainly is having Congress adopt a national AI law that replaces the possibility of 50 different state laws. But also there's a lot of implementation work to be done within government. NIST within the Department of Commerce, for example, is working very hard on adopting AI standards so that there are voluntary consensus-driven industry standards in place for the adoption of AI. So again, we know what the rules of the road are. That's really important. We're also seeing a lot of work being done on driving energy policy that will power data centers that will make AI even more productive. That's in the AI strategy that the president adopted. That's really important. And then the other thing that we think is really, really important is to make sure that the U.S. is globally competitive and is making the technology, exporting it to the world. That's a part of the strategy that we think needs to move forward as well.
I've been speaking with Jason Oxman. He's President and Chief Executive Officer of the Information Technology Industry Council. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule and on your device. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, Congress returns with deadlines looming and big questions on spending and landmark legislation. But first, from language services to tech-driven defense, SOSi is making the most of innovation to stay ahead in federal contracting. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Julian Sethian has scaled SOSi into a mid-tier powerhouse without outside equity or set-asides, while betting big on innovation. From AI to ISR, he shares the pivotal shifts that define SOSi's niche and its vision for the next 5 years. in this episode of Government Contractors to Watch, sponsored by JP Morgan Chase. Julian, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Terry.
SOSi's a really interesting case. You started as a language services firm, and now you're a mid-tier government contractor with a pretty broad portfolio. Tell us how you evolved the company from its origins to where it is now.
So my mother, who was a professor of applied linguistics, she founded the company originally to provide skilled expertise for a lot of the low-density languages to the for the federal law enforcement agencies. We were kind of this sleepy little company that nobody was paying attention to for several years until 9/11 happened. That was kind of a big turning point for us, when suddenly it became starkly obvious that the government just didn't have enough foreign language expertise organically to meet the demands in the post-9/11 era. So we started out essentially becoming the largest supplier, among the largest suppliers of foreign language expertise to the federal government. That just put us in a lot of really unique spaces that we then use as a platform to grow and diversify the business from there. So fast forward to today, we've got essentially 4 core business units and then 2 subsidiaries. We have a technology and engineering business. We have an overseas logistics and supply chain business. We have a professional and technical services business supporting the intelligence community. So we've become quite diverse since then over the course of the last 25 years.
Was there any particular turning point on any of those additions that you made that helped you scale SOSi in a particular intentional way?
So we became acquisitive in the 2016 timeframe, and that was thanks to, in no small measure, to the banks that finance us. I mean, to this day, JP Morgan has been an extraordinary partner for us, helping us to grow and diversify our business. But that was really kind of the big turning point. I had made a commitment in 2016 to make a major acquisition each year from that point onward, and we've come close to holding that commitment since then. But really, in this industry, this is the ultimate roll-up industry. If you don't factor M&A into your growth strategy, it's really hard to scale and become $1 billion+ business.
So you really grew SOSi without small business set-asides or outside equity. You grew that internally. What holds all of those lines of businesses together for you?
At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if the government's buying F-16s or services. There's a certain methodology to doing business with the government. And once you master that methodology, you can not just grow, but you can diversify very, very quickly. And so at our core, we're a national security contractor. We follow the budgets very closely, but we make sure that our capabilities and the solutions that we offer are very closely aligned to whatever the national security imperatives are of the nation. And so what really kind of binds it all together is that we've got this sort of mission-oriented focus that permeates just about everything we do. And we're national security contractors first, everything else second.
As you think about the space that you're in, it's very competitive. There are major primes. There's lots of folks trying to get in on the small business side. You sort of sit in the middle. How would you say SOSi differentiates itself? Is it agility? Is it depth? Is it special technical knowledge? What sets you apart?
I tell our people all the time, it's not what we do that sets us apart, it's who we are. We are the largest privately held company in the space that has no outside institutional capital in the business. What that basically means is that our planning horizons tend to be a lot longer. We take the long view on almost everything that we do. There just aren't that many companies like us out there, and we've been in business for 30 plus years with essentially the same ownership. I've run the business for the last 25 plus years personally myself. So it's really kind of the personal touch and just sort of this family-oriented atmosphere. So yes, we're a family-owned business. We really, try to push that culture down to the very last person within the organization.
Let's explore that culture for a minute, because you've described a very unique ownership structure in this environment, family-owned, family-operated, and yet in the national security space, you've got to work with folks who are highly technical, highly cleared. How do you keep current in the job market and at the same time hold to that family culture?
Again, I think we've never had a hard time selling ourselves, as it were, to the talent pool. People are generally attracted to us if they have an entrepreneurial mindset, if they want to be close to the customers. We tend to have our intimacy with customers and their missions tends to be a lot greater than I think the ownership structures of some of our largest competitors in the space. And so we've never really had we attract a certain type of talent, and we've never had a hard time finding the right types of people to work for us. They've got to be mission-oriented. They've got to be entrepreneurial, really want to break new ground and actually make a difference, and at the same time be held accountable for results.
I would imagine your workforce is fairly distributed, as your clients would be. So how do you keep that culture sort of streamlined and focused when folks are out in all different kinds of places?
So we're in 16 countries today. We've operated in close to 40 around the world over the course of the last 25 years. Maintaining a common culture across distributed work locations is an age-old challenge in this business because so many of our employees work in customer spaces. I make myself very accessible. I spend a lot of time on the road. We hold regular town halls with employees. Really genuinely, and then of course, over the course of the last 10 years, technology has become such that it's become a lot easier to communicate key messages and themes with a distributed workforce. And so really it's just about staying engaged, staying plugged in, keeping a very flat organizational and decision-making structure, and really spending time out in the field, in the trenches with your employees.
You mentioned that one of your lines of businesses is tech integration. How do you keep SOSi on the front edge of technology adoption, and then how do you bring that technology through to your clients?
So, I think the industry is at an inflection point right now where, innovation really does matter. It's not just empty talk. What's really made a difference for us is, in the last handful of years in particular, establishing partnerships with non-traditional technology companies that are outside of the government contracting space and really becoming a facilitator or channel into the government space. Forming strategic partnerships with pure tech firms that are not government contractors first or tech firms first, government contractors second, particularly those with tried and proven commercial industry capabilities. That's really an important part of the growth process. And I think what's really set us apart in the last couple of years, we've a lot of the changes that are taking place right now in the federal acquisition world, so FAR 2.0, which a lot of people have made a lot of, a lot of those changes really play to our strengths as an innovative entrepreneurial business.
You mentioned the FAR. There's certainly a lot of change happening in how the federal government is acquiring everything from products to services, and especially in the national security space. If you were to look ahead 5 years or so, what would you say are the biggest challenges and opportunities out there in the acquisition space, and how are you positioning SOSi to take advantage of those?
Wow, that's a big question. A lot of companies are grappling with that right now. I think you're going to see a lot less FAR Part 15 acquisitions. The way the FAR is evolving, there's going to be a preference placed on companies that offer commercial solutions. So in other words, technologies and approaches that have already been tried and tested in the commercial space. And the use of OTAs has become extremely prevalent. I think it's close to $30 billion of awards have been made on OTAs this year to date alone, which is greater than it was in the prior year. Undoubtedly, that number will start to increase. Again, this is when innovation really matters. And so, I think you're going to see an increase in FAR Part 12 acquisitions, unique capabilities that are brought to the forefront that have already been tried and proven in the commercial sector, and then scaled through best-in-class vehicles through FAR Part 8. The way we are adapting to the new marketplace is we're looking for opportunities to productize things that we do. So we have a collection of products, so real no-kidding IP that we own, that we've developed in-house, or that we've acquired through acquisitions, that we're really kind of leading with technology at this point, leading with those products, and also looking for opportunities to identify clusters of services that really genuinely are differentiating. So things that we do that other competitors don't do, that we can then productize, build some brand awareness around, and then lead with those as we approach the marketplace.
Very much back to what differentiates you in a very competitive space.
That's true.
Julian Setian is President and CEO of SOSi, and this has been Government Contractors to Watch, sponsored by J.P. Morgan Chase. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search J.P. Morgan Chase. Coming up next, Congress returns with deadlines looming and big questions on spending and landmark legislation. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Both chambers of Congress return with packed agendas. The House eyeing ACA subsidies, hearings, and unfinished appropriations, while the Senate juggles confirmations and spending bills. Looming over it all are big 2026 questions. Will January end in a CR or a shutdown? Who might rise or fall in leadership? And whether major legislation like SOSi reauthorization, workforce protections, and AI rules can break through the gridlock. Lauren Duggan, Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government, is here with his predictions. Lauren, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're sitting here at the beginning of January. Do you suppose members of Congress made New Year's resolutions?
I'm sure some of them did. They have a lot they want to get done, and this is an election year for them. So, they always start out with fresh optimism when they head toward that.
Well, let's talk about what they've got on their agenda for the coming weeks, I guess, in January. What's up in the House?
Well, I think the overriding thing is going to be the expiration of the Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies that we've talked a lot about at the end of the year. Those expired at the end of the year, and there's still a push to do something about that. One of the cliffhangers from last year was this discharge petition to force a vote that enough Republicans sided with Democrats to do that. So we'll be waiting to see how quickly they turn toward that debate and trying to move forward on that issue, because that's certainly going to be top of mind for people, and they probably got an earful from some of their constituents back at home over the holiday break.
Even that discharge petition, though, is likely to meet a dead end in the Senate, yes?
Yes, but it at least moves the ball forward. The House can get a vote, and even some of the members who had signed that on the GOP side said they wanted to just advance the ball and maybe force talks, force some more action. We saw the 2 Senate votes in December that were the Democratic and Republican plans. Neither had the support they needed to move forward. So we'll see what happens there when they get back in town and look at each other.
And what do you think the Senate will take up first?
Senate's going to do some more nominees. They started work on a few before they broke and said, okay, we'll do the first vote, the cloture vote, if you will, on one side of the new year. And then when they got back, they'll confirm some of those. So, keeping churning those judicial nominees and other folks trying to move more of Trump's nominees forward. So that'll be top of mind for them on the floor, at least, as they try to figure out a bunch of stuff off the floor, which could be more interesting, like spending and healthcare.
I was going to say, I'm surprised that appropriations wasn't first on the list in both chambers. Where are we at on those?
Well, we left with an agreement between the House and Senate top appropriators. That's Representative Tom Cole and Senator Susan Collins. They said they had a top-line agreement, and they have to figure out how to turn a top-line agreement into the 9 bills remaining to fund the government. When they reopened the government after the shutdown, 3 of the bills were done for the year. 9 still had to go, and January 30th is the date circled on the calendar there. So we're waiting to see what approach the chambers take. Can they get, a few small packages and move those over the line? There had been some talk in the House about maybe doing some mini bus votes where you package a couple of those bills, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and move them forward. The Senate had been trying to do a 5-bill mini bus package before they left and just kept running into objections and couldn't get all of those cleared before they left. So we'll see if they resume those talks and try to move one of those packages forward before that January 30th deadline, because that is, to your point, going to drive a lot of the discussion.
And some of the political topics that were left hanging at the end of last year were also in line for some sort of big headline hearings. Do you see those actually getting on the agenda and calendared?
Probably. I mean, we saw over the holiday break some discussion about Minnesota and how some child care funds were being used there. That's a hearing they've already scheduled for this week where they're going to bring some people down from Minnesota to answer questions about that. And they want to get Governor Walz, I believe, down there in February to talk as well. So that's a political issue already hitting the calendar. We'll probably see a slow start to hearings in both chambers, but they can ramp up a little more quickly than they do in the odd numbers years when they're forming Congress. This is the second session. Things will start moving more quickly. But yeah, I would expect a lot of hearings to start picking up.
I'm speaking with Lauren Duggan. He's the Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Lauren, let's turn our attention to predictions. I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball, maybe your magic 8 ball. The first question up is continuing resolution or shutdown at the end of January. What's your guess?
I would think maybe a continuing resolution if they can get an agreement on a couple of other things. I do think the ACA could get tied up in there again, but I don't think there's the same appetite to have that fight. We're in an election year now, and maybe some people will see those dynamics differently. So I would assume if they can get maybe some full year bills in a CR, maybe that'll be the path forward. But that will be a key question because that shutdown was painful for a lot of people, and they might want to avoid it again.
Well, that's good news. Second question up, any key leadership changes? We're hearing a lot about members deciding to step down or retire. What does that mean for the leadership of key committees in either chamber?
It might not mean as much today as it will maybe a year from now, where, there's a couple of dynamics there. There's some concern about Republicans that maybe they'll lose control of one or both chambers, and that would obviously have an impact there. On the Senate side, we know that Dick Durbin, who's the number 2 Democrat, is retiring, and Brian Schatz of Hawaii has kind of put his name out there as probably the likely successor there. But, Charles Schumer had some leadership pressures last year with some of the way he handled the initial shutdown fight back in March, and we'll see what that means for him. But yeah, I think we'll see more jockeying over the course of the year for some of the chairmanships opening up for retirement reasons or otherwise. And we're also watching to see if anyone else made a decision over the holidays not to run again this year.
All right. And besides appropriations, there were a lot of legislative priorities that just sort of didn't get addressed by the end of 2025. So let's take a couple of those. Do you think we'll get the longer term SOSi reauthorization through?
That's a good question. We'll have to see what the dynamics are there. There wasn't a lot of movement so far, but they could go for that. And there are, other things and security questions that maybe they'll get dovetailed together. But that's one we'll have to wait and see.
What about federal workforce protections? It seemed like we were starting to mobilize some interest around protecting the federal workforce at the end of last year. Some of those features got included in the shutdown bill, the continuing resolution that got passed at that point. Do you see a mobilization maybe towards more federal workforce protection legislation?
We'll have to see how that pans out, because I think you are right. Maybe that could have been the high water mark, some of the things they got in the government reopening deal, if you will. But there will continue to be pressure on that, and watching how things are playing out in different agencies and watching how court cases continue to go. And so if people can cobble together a majority on some of those things, maybe they'll move them forward.
Crypto and banking was another big topic. Lots of discussion around it. Maybe a lot of heat, but not much light. What do you think?
Crypto will be top of mind. Senate Banking Committee was working on a plan to meet the House-passed market structure bill. There's still interest in doing that. One of the top proponents of that in the Senate has been Cynthia Lummis, a senator from Wyoming, who already announced she'd going to retire at the end of the year, so maybe she'll be even more focused on that. But there is a big push to do something in the crypto space. They passed the stablecoin bill last year. Some people even want to change some of the dynamics of that legislation in a crypto package. So I would think that there's high interest in doing something about that this year.
One more topic, AI regulations. Whether the federal government should do it or the states was a big roundabout. Where do you think that winds up?
There's still interest in doing something about that. The president issued his executive order trying to limit state regulation of that, but I think more people would like to see things done even legislatively. That could be a tough thing to get through. It was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act debate and fell out during consideration. So the proponents of that haven't given up. So we'll see if that comes up in debates around things like child online safety as well, because there's a push to do that bill in both chambers. And I could see AI regulation coming up in that context as well.
All right. So as Congress gets its feet back under it here at the beginning of January, what are you watching for?
Watching to see how these debates play out and how quickly the FISA debate, that's something that is a kind of a sleeper April deadline to reauthorize Section 702, which I think they put a 2-year extension in 2 years ago. So that's going to be a big fight about government surveillance powers, and one that's not really party line, because you've got kind of coalitions across the parties that'll take sides on that issue with the administration weighing in. So that's a big fight coming early that could dominate a lot of discussion here.
Well, we'll see how things get started. I'm speaking with Lauren Duggan. He's the Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Lauren, thanks as always.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Heading into 2026, the Trump administration appears to only be getting started on its plans for overhauling the career civil service. Further changes for the federal workforce are on the horizon, and many of them are laid out in the goals of the new president's management agenda. Here with a look at what's ahead for federal employees is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
The workforce is always a topic of interest, and after the 2025 cuts that we saw, what comes next for staffing at agencies in 2026 and forward?
What we're going to see is a lot of this come out of agencies' annual staffing plans. These were directed by President Trump in an executive order over the summer, where he told agencies essentially to think about, now that we have, scaled down significantly the size of the federal workforce, what are your staffing plans going to look like in 2026 and then every year beyond that? That executive order over the summer kind of lifted the hiring freeze, in October lifted the hiring freeze that agencies had seen for the better part of the year. But going forward, it's still going to have a lot of restrictions. So what OPM and OMB have said in recent guidance is that staffing plans from agencies have to consider organizational restructuring and consolidation, where you might have to eliminate what they call unnecessary management layers, eliminate unnecessary jobs and contractor positions, how to manage performance of what they describe as underperforming employees, and a lot more in this hiring guidance going forward. So even though we're not going to likely see the same level of workforce reductions going forward, we are going to see some pretty strict limitations still in how agencies are moving forward. The Trump administration officials have said they want to essentially move the workforce forward in a way that maintains the current size of the federal workforce that the Trump administration has managed to create now.
Federal agencies have never been very good at workforce strategy or workforce planning. Is OPM offering them any extra resources to support this pretty significant effort?
They did offer some hiring guidance or workforce planning guidance, but it was a relatively short document. It's likely that OPM is going to be working with agencies one-on-one, maybe behind the scenes, to talk about some of this. But ultimately, I think it's going to come down to agencies presenting their plans for review and approval from OPM. It's unclear how much guidance they're going to get as they're developing those plans necessarily, but it's something where OPM will certainly have feedback and some more to say about those plans.
One of the other changes is going to be how the administration is adding to what it says is accountability. What is that starting to look like?
There's a couple different efforts where we've seen this word pop up multiple times over. One that will come to mind pretty quickly for a lot of people is the schedule policy/career employment classification. It was previously known as Schedule F, and what this does is essentially take career members of the civil service and make them at-will employees if they are in policy influencing type positions. OPM has estimated that about 50,000 career federal workers could be reclassified as what they're calling Schedule PC, and that will impact a pretty significant portion of the workforce. There have been estimates that put that number at 200,000 or so. It's really going to depend on what we see moving forward from agencies once we have those final regulations and agencies actually start going through the work of transitioning those employees. And then a separate part of this accountability effort that the Trump administration has talked about regularly is this idea of performance management. A lot of Trump administration officials, including OPM Director Scott Cooper, have talked about how they want to completely change the performance management standards for the entire federal workforce. They say that far too many federal employees are considered high performers, and it's overinflating the performance rating system. So instead, they're going to set a lot stricter limitations on how many employees can be ranked at a level 4 or 5 out of 5 on their performance evaluations, and then encourage agencies and supervisors to rank a lot of employees in the lower 1 through 3 categories. They've also encouraged supervisors and agencies to think about, faster and stricter discipline for employees who might be performing poorly. So a lot of those changes have been topics of discussion over the last year, but it's something I think into 2026 we're going to see actually start to play out, most likely as those regulations move forward.
There's also a term of HR art that's been talked about a lot by this administration, the focus on merit in federal hiring from the Trump administration. What is the merit application going to look like in 2026?
One part of that I think has caught a lot of people's attention was these essay questions that are appearing on USA Jobs and a lot of job applications. So now anyone who is interested in joining the federal workforce and applying for a new position has to fill out questions on what is their favorite executive order and how they're going to fulfill President Trump's goals of efficiency. So there seems to be this move, at least in that regard, toward bringing federal employees and those who are interested in joining the civil service more in line with what the president is trying to accomplish and presidential priorities, as they've said multiple times over. But there's a lot else in that merit hiring plan, which OPM released about midway through 2025. There's also goals for reducing time to hire, focusing on skills-based recruitment, and other ways to, what they say, will streamline the federal hiring process. That's something that's not really going to be necessarily new, but they are moving forward at least in some things that have been transcendent across administrations.
You mentioned many of these ideas are unique to the Trump administration, but some of them are not, and they've been tried in the past. Where is the administration moving forward efforts that we have seen from prior administrations?
So one thing that came up more recently was OPM's new Tech Force recruitment initiative. This is something that they announced just at the end of 2025, and it talks a lot about trying to hire more technology expertise into government, like AI, software development, data scientists. And, that is the way that they put it forward, was saying that this was a new and very different way to approach the idea of bringing more tech talent into government, but that is something that we have seen in past administrations as well. The Biden administration and the Obama administration and the first Trump administration all had very similar efforts to bring in more tech expertise in these temporary roles, usually for a year or two, to try to jumpstart some agencies who are trying to work on modernization efforts. So that's just one specific example, but more broadly, there's also, as I mentioned, the skills-based hiring, sharing certificates, so trying to change the hiring process itself. Just a lot of ways that they're building on things that have been talked about for many years already.
Drew, many of these, like the change to performance metrics or the accountability proposals, have run aground in the past on statutory limitations or civil litigation. Why does the Trump administration think that they will be more successful?
That is not entirely clear, but one way that they have generally tried to set out to change these things going forward is by moving them through the regulatory process and trying to change the regulations around performance management. There are some things that are limiting that in law and in statute, but they are trying to change some of the regulations to have agencies adhere to those. It's not entirely clear yet how agencies are going to be moving that forward. I think a lot of it is going to come down, as we spoke to earlier, OPM guidance and OPM's help to figure out how to actually get these things started. But, I think it's still to come how that's all going to play out, and if we're genuinely going to see a real difference compared to prior efforts toward those same ends.
I know you and many others will be keeping a close eye on this, so we'll look forward to any updates.
Absolutely. I will be looking forward to this as well.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman, and you can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying, I need to be a great leader, and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being a witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done, and you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves, and that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances in understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose, a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable, given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question. Who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all, somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Ed was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.